Hello.
Good afternoon. We're just about ready to get started. Who do we have on the line?
Cassandra Smith and Rachel Foreman.
Okay, we'll be starting very shortly. Thank you for coming.
Okay. Are you Leslie?
No, I'm Sylvia. We just used Leslie's name for the account.
You sound like Sylvia.
Yeah, it's me, Sylvia.
Just a few minutes, minutes ago, like a couple of hours ago.
Yeah. Are you ready for me?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Hi. I was like, okay, let me Sylvia has that. My bad. Sorry, Sylvia. All right. So, hello and welcome. How are you all doing today? Oh, this is Naomi Gilmore, by the way. Can you all hear me? Hello?
Can you repeat yourself again?
Are you unable to hear me? Hello?
Repeat yourself again?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Hi, this is Naomi Gilmore. I work with Navajo Nation Department of Justice, as you all may know by now. If not, for those who are new, I work within the Economic Development Unit of Navajo Nation Department of Justice. Today's training is on Navajo Nation procurement. And as I stated last week, or provided information last week's training was very general. And it was very general because I had a couple of things that I had to do, and there's some emergencies I had to take care of. And so this week, as I promised, I would give maybe a little bit more time and allow for questions, because we do have about 40 minutes on this phone call. So thank you for those of you who are on the phone. Also, I want to remind everybody that everyone who's on the phone and who's also participating through webcam, that any facts that are specific to your chapter, if you would provide a request for service for that, for your specific issue at your chapter, I may not be able to entertain any questions that are very specific to your chapter. Here's the reason why. The reason I will not be able to entertain specific questions to your chapter's issues with regards to procurement is because of what's called attorney-client privileged communication, which means that because I have 110 clients, which is 110 chapters who seek legal advice from Navajo Nation Department of Justice, I must keep communication confidential among the 112, or the 110 chapters who seek legal advice from me. So, and also I do provide legal advice as well to DCD, whom you all work with as well. So DCD is also my client, and more specifically, the Administrative Service Center, who provides technical assistance to chapters. So without any further delay, I would like to say again, thank you for participating. And today's training is going to be generally, the PowerPoint is, from this PowerPoint, and the way that I've structured it, it's going to be about Navajo Nation procurement, the Navajo Nation Procurement Code. I will talk about Navajo Nation procurement in general, and then also exceptions to the Navajo Nation General Procurement Code. What I mean by exceptions is there is 3 other types of procurement, and the types of this procurement are small purchase. So a small purchase is any procuring for service or goods less than $50,000. second, I will also talk about, first I'll talk about sole source and then small purchase. And then I'll also talk about emergency procurement. And I do have a slide in the Navajo Nation procurement slide that I provided here today, which I will not be able to distribute like I do all of the other PowerPoints. The reason for that is because I would like individuals to seek consultation with Navajo Nation Department of Justice on procurement issues. The reason I say that is because there's so many facts that could either change what's going on within the community or there's different facts that could arise, and if I provide the PowerPoint, you may be thinking, oh, well, this is going to apply to my situation. And that's something that I wouldn't want you to do, because as my client, I want to provide the best service that I possibly can to you and protect the chapter from liability. So, so those are the reasons why I'm not going to provide the Navajo Nation procurement PowerPoint slide to you all only for that purpose, because it is fact intensive. What I mean by fact intensive is that situations could change, different chapters have different issues that arise, and using this PowerPoint as a blanket for all circumstances would be incorrect, and it would be harmful to your chapter if you did do something like that. And then you say, well, Naomi Gilmore provided this training and she said X, Y, and Z. I would still say that I'm only giving you some general law on Navajo Nation Procurement Code. But to apply the actual law to the facts, I would need to see a request for service from chapters. Okay? So that is the only reason why, and I wanted to make that disclaimer just so that you all know why it's very important. So generally, the Navajo Nation Procurement Code, if you would like to find out more information about the Navajo Nation Procurement Code, you can look on the Navajo Nation Council's website. On Navajo Nation Council's website, you'll find Titles 1 through 26. Titles 1 through 26 may not, the code that's on the website may not be current law because there's been a lot of amendments. So unless you know how to go through the amendments and put everything together, I suggest that maybe you contact DOJ, or maybe I can try my best to provide what information I have here on my side that I use. So Navajo Nation Procurement Code in general is governed by Title 12 of the Navajo Nation Code. Title 12 is known as a fiscal section of the Navajo Nation Code. And you'll also find within that same section other sections that apply to the Appropriations Act, the Navajo Nation Appropriations Act, as well as the Budget and Finance Committee's rules and regulations. So it really is regarding fiscal matter. Fiscal matter is anything to do with Navajo Nation funds. So generally, the Navajo Nation General Procurement Act, as I said, is found in Title 12. The purpose of the General Procurement Act is to promote fair competition that's consistent with Navajo Nation laws and policies, which means that all parties must negotiate, perform, or administer Navajo Nation contracts in good faith. Now, here is some of the, so whenever you hear key terms like, oh, well, what does it mean to act in good faith? What does it mean to negotiate? What does it mean to perform? What does it mean to administer? So all of these different facts, I know that I won't be able to get to some of those answers today. However, I just want to let you know that good faith is really making an effort, a diligent effort. Good faith is, like, for example, if I were to procure for services of goods, but then I just simply contacted maybe a vendor that I already know, and because I already know this vendor, and I know that they do a specific good with that, or a specific, they provide a specific service or good without going to the procurement process, that is not good faith. Good faith means that you have gone through the rules, you have gone through the process, and also that you're providing fair notice to all of the vendors who may potentially qualify. So here are some other examples of good faith. If, for example, a chapter were to give one vendor who wasn't awarded through sole source a contract, and because of that the person administrator or the procuring officer, which is the person who is procuring for the goods, does not maybe seek the BDR source list, the Business Regulatory Department source list. And there are a number of priorities that are set under the Navajo Nation Business Opportunity Act. So, for example, if you didn't do that and then the vendor found other vendors who did qualify, found out about that, that vendor could potentially try to file a lawsuit against the chapter because that was unfair competition. And whether or not a vendor would do that, I don't know. However, there is that risk of liability should that vendor find out. And as you all know, that, and also, as I've been told, you chapters have what's called a domain network or something, where you all find out about different things through, other chapters or hearsay, or somehow you all find out about different things. So there's a likelihood of other vendors finding out about certain things, and if they know about these codes, they could potentially file a lawsuit against the chapter. So that is the reason why it behooves the chapter to follow the Navajo Nation procurement codes and act in good faith. And it could be construed in a couple of other different ways. However, I don't have any specific facts right now. These are just some scenarios that I'm trying to provide to assist you in identifying what that means. Also, the Navajo Nation Procurement Code Act applies to every expenditure of public funds. Now, I didn't put a definition here for public funds, but what this is Navajo Nation funds, which Navajo Nation funds or chapter funds can be construed as public funds. So the reason I say can be construed as public funds is because they're chapter funds. And chapters are still part of the Navajo Nation government, regardless of whether or not of LGA status. What I mean by LGA status is that the Navajo Nation government provides funding to both LGA and non-LGA certified chapters. And that fund comes from central government. So the intention of what every expenditure of public funds means that anytime you use Navajo Nation funds to procure for services or goods, you must procure. And also this act applies only to contracts solicited or entered into after 2001. And I'm pretty sure that everybody right now who's entering into a contract for services or goods would fall within this definition. However, contracts for services of outside attorneys or tribal court advocates shall only be awarded by the Attorney General of the Navajo Nation. Now here there are some individuals who hire attorneys who are not who have not been properly procured for. So if you are a chapter and you've hired an outside counsel, please make sure that you properly procure for that attorney, but also seek the approval of the Navajo Nation Attorney General. The Navajo Nation Attorney General has a specific contract that it uses to, or we use. As you all know, ECDU is under the umbrella of the Attorney General, so Navajo Nation Department of Justice. And so make sure that your contract does get approved by the AG, the Attorney General of the Navajo Nation, before you enter into any kind of agreement, contract, with or contingency fee or any type of fee with a lawyer who is licensed with the Navajo Nation, but an outside lawyer. So make sure that you get that done. Otherwise, this could potentially become an area where the chapter would be found acting outside the scope of authority, or also this could also become a sanctionable action under the Auditor General's list of sanctionable items. So, and I'm not quite sure what else may happen. So in any event, any contract that is not properly authorized would be seen by Navajo Nation Department of Justice as a contract that was authorized outside the scope of the chapter, meaning that the individual who entered into that contract would be held personally liable on that contract, whether or not it was for services for goods, or even if a chapter received a chapter resolution saying that this is what our community members want, and here's what our community members want, and here's what we're going to do. So even in that situation, it is really important that all chapters continue to follow Navajo Nation laws and policies, even though your community members have by resolution enacted, you know, the chapter to do a specific act. So I just want to impress that the importance of that. So make sure that you consult with Navajo Nation Department of Justice if you have, if you are receiving services of outside attorney or tribal court advocate. And also, this act does not apply to LGA certified chapters within a Five Management System policy, because LGA certified chapters have its own Five Management System policy. And here's where a lot of people get confused. And the reason why I say people get confused, or chapters, and it's agents or officials. When I say agents, I'm really talking about chapter administration staff, either for an LGA or non-LGA certified chapter. The confusion is that most people understand this to mean that, okay, well, if I have my own procurement system, then I don't have to follow Navajo Nation laws and policies. That is incorrect. And I'll tell you a little bit more when I get into the Five Management System, why that is. And I will read very specific sections of your approved Five Management System policy and show you where that's located in the event that you disagree with what I'm saying, because all LGA and LGA certified chapters within approved Five Management System policy must follow their procurement code, but even in the procurement code, you'll find that you still have to follow different provisions within the Navajo Nation code. So even though this act does say that, and I took this language directly out of the Navajo Nation procurement code. So I want to make sure that you all are very clear, even though this act does say that this act does not apply to LGA certified chapters within approved Five Management System, because LGA certified chapters have its own FMS policy, and that's under 12 NNC 303B, as in boys. So even those chapters must still comply with Navajo Nation laws and policies, because even when you look at different the chapter's Five Management System policies, you will see citations and references to the Navajo Nation code, like Title V, which is NABOA, Title 12, the Navajo Nation Procurement Act, and there are other provisions that are still very similar. It references you back to Title 26 also, so there are still specific provisions, even in the Five Management System policy, that references back to Title 26, 12, and other codes within the Navajo Nation. Also, 6, the General Procurement Act. All words used in this act shall have their ordinary meaning unless context requires different meanings or different definitions is prescribed in a different provision. What this means is, and the reason why I put it in this PowerPoint is because sometimes, even with regard to the Navajo Nation Code, there's Titles 1 through 26. And within 1 to 26, there may be other definitions that are used within the code that may have a different meaning. However, in this code, what it's saying is that we're going to use the ordinary meaning of what a regular person and how they would read this code. But if the language inside of Title 12 says, okay, we'll reference 26 NNC 2002, which is the contract provision in Title 26, which applies to all chapters of the Navajo Nation. So if that's, and then you go to a different section, and that section has a different meaning than what's in here, then that's what this provision is telling you. Hopefully that makes sense. The next code, there's the next slide. So General Procurement Act, of course, and I want to make sure that you all know what the definition for procurement means. Procurement means buying, purchasing, renting, leasing, and acquiring any other goods or services. Services can be things like labor, time, or effort. So sometimes people think, well, what is delivery of like paper? Is that a service? I think that you're actually buying the good, which is like the paper, or like the good is the paper, and that's what you're really purchasing. The service would be, for example, if someone came over to the chapter and, maybe fix the plumbing, that would be labor. And the time to do that would be the time and labor for that, or the effort to put, something back together because the plumber needed to come over to the chapter. And it may not include things such as delivery. However, I don't want to exclude it, but, if you have more questions, please contact DOJ so that way we can make sure that it falls into goods or services. And also, the preferred method of selecting a vendor is written into 12 NNC 331, which is the preferred method for source selection. Source selection is really selecting your vendors, and even under 12 NNC 331, you'll find the process for an invitation for bid, public notice, bid opening, bid acceptance, and bid evaluation, correction or withdrawal of bids. In these different sections, you'll find the process. And I put in, like, for example, number one, under 331, invitation for bid, the reason I only put this very limited slide here is because the actual provision says that the bid shall include a purchase description, actual terms and conditions, and then it provides a lot of other steps. But that's why I just put this here very simply to make sure that you know that there is a process to follow under the competitive sealed bid, and you can find that in 12 NNC 331 of the Navajo Nation Code. Okay, and here's where I said that I was going to get back to the 5 management system policy. There are some chapters, as you all know, there are 65 non-certified chapters, and there are 45 LGA certified chapters. And is it LGA? Okay. So in this room with me, I also have the chapter manager from Chimpschimbitwal here, and I know that Chimpschimbitwal is a LGA certified chapter. And there are only 45 LGA certified chapters within the Navajo Nation, and there are 65 non-LGA certified chapters. So of the 45 LGA certified chapters, I didn't even, so on my 5 management system slide, if you can see that, I see the 2007 FMS and then the 2010 FMS. However, there are 5 chapters who were LGA certified even before the 2007 and the 2010 5 management system policy. And those chapters are, I believe, one is Nahatatsil, so there's Nahatatsil, Steamboat, Shanto, Tuba City, and there's a chapter that I'm thinking about that's near Sheep Springs, and it starts with an N. I can't even remember the name right now, but there's a chapter over in the eastern area that is LGA certified chapter, an LGA certified chapter. However, they don't have the model 5 management system policy from the 2007 or the 2010. Ma'am, may I ask you which 5 management system policy you have?
I'm sure the 2010.
The 2010. Okay, when was your chapter certified? In 2010. Okay, what day? July. Okay, yeah, you probably do have the 2010 then. Okay. So for example, I'm going to, like I said earlier, I was going to go through the 2010, or I'm going to go through maybe a specific section in the 5 management system policy. The reason I want to impress this importance upon chapters is that even though, as I said before in the previous slide, that it says in the Navajo Nation Procurement Code that chapters should follow their own 5 management system policy and do not have to follow Navajo Nation law, maybe the correct statement would be that yes, LGA certified chapters, you follow your 5 management system policy. However, in your 5 management system policy, you're going to have to reference back to Navajo Nation Code, because in your 5 management system policy, let me take, for example, the procurement process of one chapter. So this is from the from DOJ's 2010 Navajo Nation, or 2010 5 management system policy. And here is the Chichimbatwa chapter shall have a clearly defined remedy under terms of any contract or agreement entered into by Chichimbatwa chapter. If either party is treated in an unjust manner, any such remedy shall strictly comply with the Navajo Nation Sovereign Immunity Act, which is in 1 NNC 551 et sec, pursuant to 1, which is in Title 1 of the Sovereign Immunity Act, or an agreement providing for arbitration shall require prior review and approval by the Navajo Nation Department of Justice and compliance with the Navajo Nation Arbitration Act. So here, chapters who have a 5 management system policy, and here's where DOJ has told LGA certified chapters that yes, you have authority to sign, President may have authority to sign your contract at the local level without sending them to the Navajo Nation Code, or to the Navajo Nation Department of Justice. We do highly recommend that it comes to the Navajo Nation Department of Justice, because each of those contracts that you sign and enter into may have provisions for Navajo Nation sovereign immunity, and also the Arbitration Act. So in your 5 management system policy, it's an explicit, there's explicit language. What I mean by explicit language is it's expressed. It's in your 5 management system policy. If you have the 2010 DOJ's 5 management system policy, which means that you have to consult with Navajo Nation Department of Justice before entering into this contract, because of the Arbitration Act and the Sovereign Immunity Act. So these are 2 very important provisions that sometimes chapters are not properly protecting sovereign immunity, or also different dispute resolutions through the Arbitration Act. Then chapters are putting so individuals who are signing those contracts are putting your chapters potentially at risk for liability. So if there was a situation where there was a contract that was entered into by an LGA certified chapter, and someone waived sovereign immunity, and the contract maybe was for $10,000, but then the chapter maybe breached the contract and the vendor decided to sue the chapter, then the chapter may be required, if they breach the contract, meaning breaching means they didn't perform under the contract, that there's a potential liability that their non-performance could be litigated in court. And I'm not sure how many of you know the court system, but it does cost a lot of money to litigate in court to try to fix these different things, especially when sovereign immunity is especially when the Sovereign Immunity Act arises, and Navajo Nation Council is the only entity that I know of right now that can waive sovereign immunity, and that's by 2/3 vote of council delegates. So that's a pretty high standard to waive sovereign immunity. So chapters, make sure that you get your contracts pre-reviewed. Even if you are an LGA certified chapter, because of the provisions in your procurement code, which states that you should be getting it reviewed by DOJ. And another section I also wanted to show you all is, and I'm reading straight from the 5 management system policy of the 5 management system policy from 2010. Another section also references back to Title 26. So, for example, so the Chichimbatwa chapter shall comply with all applicable Navajo Nation laws, including but not limited to the Navajo Nation Business Opportunity Act, which is under Title 5 of the Navajo Nation Code, Navajo Nation Procurement Act, Title 12, the Privacy Act under Title II, Ethics and Government Law under Title II, and the Uniform Commercial Code under Title V, including but not limited to other provisions in Title 26, 2002, which is what I was talking about with regard to contracts. And in that section, it'll provide for you steps and a checklist of what you need to do in order to have a valid contract. So, number one, sole source. So, sole source in Navajo Nation Procurement Code addresses, so in the Navajo Nation Procurement Code, as I said, there is some exceptions to the general rule of procurement. And the general rule of procurement is that it's all contracts, any expenditure of public funds. You have to get, bid process, competition, and you have to go through the whole process of opening your bid, providing public notice, making sure that you give priority under NABOA. So some of those statutes may still apply. However, in a sole source, the sole source is really making sure that you get the authorized person. An authorized person determines in writing that there is only one source for the required goods or service. So what this means is, under sole source, it really is that there's one vendor, and the only vendor that I can think of that is absolutely downright sole source is Navajo Nation NCUA. They're the only entity that I can think of right now that is like, oh yeah, we're going to sole source. There's no question about it, because there is no one else, no other electricity company, utility company within the Navajo Nation that provides utility services on the Navajo Nation. Utility services meaning electricity. So hands down, that's one vendor that I know that is sole source. However, even with regard to that, but if there are other individuals, which I can't even think of right now, you'd have to get determination by the appropriate authorized person. And in Title 12, 335, Section 335, you'll find which individuals are authorized to do that. And there's the authorized individuals. I didn't list them in my PowerPoint only because I wanted you to go through, and perhaps maybe you can go through and review the language yourself, because this is we're already at 340 and I'm still at sole source. Okay, so please review that section to figure, actually, let me just read it really quickly. So under that section, it says that the director. So these are rules that are promulgated by the Budget and Finance Committee. The executive director of the affected division or other procurement officer in concert with, so what it means by procurement officer. So if you're, for example, if you're a non-LGA certified chapter, that means that you're going to have to get the DCD's approval. So make sure that you have it reviewed by DCD. If you're an LGA certified chapter, it would really be, your chapter president, or another individual who is authorized under your Fire Management System policy, whoever that is based on your Fire Management System policy. And so it would be that person, and then also in addition to the director, division of finance, purchasing department, or authorized designee, as well as a representative from DOJ. So if, for example, you're so I'm not talking about contracts. I'm not talking about the 164B process. I'm only talking about procurement. So these are for procuring for goods. And maybe I'll have to have another meeting where I'm going to have to put everything together to show you all how it all works in concert with one another. So the contract portion, the procurement portion, the Navajo Nation business opportunity portion, and all of these other things, and how you put a whole contract together, everything from point A to point B, or C, D, and E. So I'm only specifically talking about procurement. And so the reason I make that clarification is because there are some new rules under the 164B process, which is to review contracts. So contract review is reviewing in the 164B process. So even when you do sole source, you must still give certified entities under the Navajo Nation Business Opportunity Act preference for sole source. What that means is if you go onto the Navajo Nation Business Regulatory Department's website, you'll find a source list, and that source list will provide you possible vendors to provide a certain service or good. So what the procuring party must do, when I say procuring party, I'm really referring to maybe the authorized representative from the chapter who is procuring for the service. And usually it's chapter manager or community service coordinators that do that. And sometimes in limited circumstances, it's the AMS or the administrative assistant at the LG certified chapters that usually take on that role doing that. So when I'm referring to procuring officer, I'm really referring to the person who's authorized to try to negotiate and do all the other things with regard to procurement. So, for example, if you go to the Navajo Nation Business Regulatory Department, you're going to find that source list. And also, you're going to have a written determination and selection of the particular contract. And that should be on file. And then the other type of procurement is small purchase. A small purchase is a contract under $50,000. The contract cannot be divided under $50,000. There are some chapters who may have had the same vendor and have split up the contract from one was like $20,000, another $10,000, and another for $20,000. And because they thought they stayed under $50,000 and divided up the $50,000 contract into 3 separate contracts, that may not be valid. What I mean by that is that it was like for the same service, the same good, and they just divided it up into 3 different portions. So it stays under $50,000. That's not allowed under the code. One contract, one good, one service for that $50,000. And also, for small purchase, you must see the BDR source list, which I referenced earlier, and where you can find that. It's on the Navajo Nation Business Regulatory Department website. And then also, because certified entities under NABOA receive preference for small purchases, what I mean by that is that there are specific Navajo Nation entities who've registered with Navajo Nation Business Regulatory Department as possible vendors providing a certain service or good. And so because they receive preference, they are listed, and so you must contact the Business Regulatory Department to make sure that you work with them and in consultation with them with regard to what that means. Also, other required signatures are, like I said earlier in the other sole sourcing, that it has to, there's required signatures of the program director, division director, procurement officer, and the attorney general. However, the 5 management system policy in Navajo Nation, the 2010 5 management system policy, there's a different section on procurement. So in that section under small purchases, there's a couple of different things. Like, for example, there's limitations. Like there's purchases from $0 to $2,500, $2,500 to $10,000, and each of these have different limitations and also different instructions. And I just want to make sure that you all know that even in the procurement process or LGA certified chapters for the 2010 version have specific duties, and you can find that under your 5 management system policy. Emergency procurement. I currently have some chapters who think that simply calling an emergency is enough to forego everything else under the procurement code. That is not accurate. Anytime that you're trying to do an emergency procurement under the Navajo Nation Procurement Code under 12 NC 324, you must get approval again from the approved person, and then also you must look at the business budget and finance committee's definition of what an emergency is. And most of that is defined as a threat to the public health, welfare, or safety under emergency conditions. Also, there's also one other question that I'm trying to determine right now, whether or not that would apply to animals, because under the code, it applies to humans and not to animals. So it really kind of depends on the facts and circumstances, and I want to make sure that I get that cleared up for maybe in the future, if I need to clear that up between animal and human and what this act provides, my sense is that it may not apply to animals, even though under Navajo Nation common law, people are maybe are thinking that animals are part of, your family, and we take animals as part of a bigger consideration in Navajo Nation society. So, and it's kind of one of those areas where it's one of those areas that's a little touchy. So as soon as I have a legal opinion on that, I'll definitely send that out. Also, there must be a written determination of an emergency, which will be made by the authorized person, and also even under whatever practical circumstances an emergency exists, that you must try to get the entities who are listed on the business regulatory source list also listed. So as you can see from the different codes that I provided here, that even if you're trying to fall under the exceptions of small purchase, emergency procurement, or sole sourcing, there's still a process. And some chapters, maybe perhaps because there's not enough education on the Procurement Act and how to implement it, that there are chapters who are not going through the additional steps, and this could possibly become a sanctionable area. So if there are chapters who are trying to become LGA certified, please make sure that you follow the procurement code listed in Title 12 of the Navajo Nation Code. So with all of you, we have about 10 minutes left for questions. Does anyone have questions? If not, I'm going to close this out and hope you all have a very good day. And I know the procurement code is a very exciting topic. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Okay.